Good morning. Welcome. This is Angela Coulter and
Sarah Sieg Avignoni.
bringing you this week's Ascended World Weekly Collective Energy Share, whatever we want to call it. So, where to start this week? Now we have a set of one thing. It's so funny because we have a whole set of things we talk about on Friday, and then by Monday it's like, oh, it's all shifted. But the things we talked about on Friday was such a great thing.
Right. And maybe that's why everything's shifted. So I think it warrants discussion.
Yeah. So we got into talking on Friday about guidance and visions and goals. I had talked about it on my podcast, my Living the Shift podcast on Thursday, and we were talking about this. One of the biggest things for us, what did we even talk about last week? Do you remember? I should go back and look at my notes. After we talked, the circular remembrance thing. Yep. Yep.
And the resistance being what we need to look at, right?
Yep. Okay. Yep. I'm glad I keep my notes. So here's the thing. And we've been doing a lot of this already, like this whole creating out of context. And I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm like getting that constantly now. And it's actually I get this out of context. Like I sort of get a piece of context coming in when I'm guided to do something. And it's sort of like, okay, it doesn't quite make sense, but I can sort of see it make sense and whatever it feels right or whatever.
Right.
So one of the things we were talking about on Friday, and I can't even remember the context, but I'm just looking at my notes, was the being able to look at guidance without fear and without judgment.
Right.
And like I said, I can't remember the context. So if you remember, go ahead and jump in. Maybe we should write more notes when we
I know. I'm thinking about that too. Well, and I think we can take that back to a post you made about how when you were in meditation and you went in for one particular, you went into meditation, but were guided to do something aside from what you went in to focus on.
Yes. And that was, and that's something, it's all about, actually, this is a really good topic in itself, is it's as we move along here in our consciousness, it's such a good thing to focus on accepting guidance as it is without trying to judge it or translate it and just follow it, right?
Or manipulate it.
Right, or manipulate it. Well, that's the translating, right? Because the ego says, oh, well, this looks like this, so then I have to, build this around this because then it feels better to me, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And feeling better is all about ego, right? So it's, and when we talk about like, I've seen visions of this or I've seen visions of that, and then people say, right, like, what do you mean? And when we talk about like, creating out of context, well, that makes me feel really uncomfortable. And I talk about, we were talking about how that really, like, that is this embedding of the ego within guidance, right? So, what's funny is I have some texts saying that asking us if we're on live, and I'm like, yeah, we are. Yes, we are. Weird.
Because I'm watching this, but it's in a different place. I saw. You have to scroll down further.
Yeah. Okay. So, like when we say, like, we look at all the drama around that, right? So we look at so many people who do visioning, they do all kinds of like channeling or whatever. And then what happens is this emotion gets imparted into it of, oh, what is this? What is, or like, oh, this is horrible. Look at this terrible thing that I saw, right? That like sort of encompassed into
judgment.
And that's judgment. And then we don't think like, oh, and people, and like in the people context, we as incarnate and how we have been habituated while like this part of our unconsciousness is here, it's like we are so prone to persuasion in that way, and we don't even realize it. Like, so when somebody says, isn't that horrible? Like, oh my God, look at this horrible thing that I saw. Well, guess what? Now you have created an adjective for that thing, right? You've made it horrible without even explaining it, right?
Right.
So that invokes a certain kind of emotion from the ego right away. Oh, I need to fear this. I need to be angry at this, or
I need to judge. I need to then feel different about myself.
Right.
Because I know I had some dreams the other night, and it was, I was standing with someone while they killed a baby.
Oh, wow.
And I mean, and it happened 3 different times, and I felt judgment creep in, and it was like, no, I'm just holding space, and that it felt like this is what needed to happen. But it's so, I could have so judged that differently. And I still have no context for it.
Yeah. Put that on the shelf, right?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so like, that's something for us to look at. That's really important, is that judgment of the guidance, right? So one thing is getting clear on the guidance, but the second thing is to accept it as it is without translation and without judging, because as soon as we judge it, we then change its meaning. Like we change the potential of what it means. So instead of saying, well, I see this and look at this horrible thing I see, right? Then it just becomes I see this. And so I have over the years personally stopped sharing a lot of the stuff that I see or understand from the bigger picture, because I know like people will react to it, because then right away they want to put an adjective to it. They want to put like a judgment to it. Is that good or is it bad? Is it scary or is it, fun? Right.
Well, and it was for you.
Right.
And it was created and seen through your filters.
Yes.
Not theirs.
Yes. And the thing is, as we see these things, and understand, and when we focus on the bigger picture, right? Oh, there's the yawn already. It becomes really important for us to just even saying what we see without putting that judgment behind it makes it a clearer representation, right? Even though it's still a filter, but there's a clearer representation without emotion behind it, right?
Well, and that's why, I know you say consistently that that's the reason that you need to listen to what people have to say, and then see if it resonates with you, see how it filters through for you, and then glean from it what's for you.
Right. Exactly. Because, and if I start it with emotion behind it, it's already then marred and biased. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so in the nature of doing, say, an energy healing session, what do? We talk about, like I'll talk about things as I see them. And, I see things that make some people balk, and I've seen some pretty intense things, and it's like, okay. And what I'm more interested in, excuse me, woof, there's a lot of yawning going on already, is how does it fit into the bigger picture versus trying to judge a particular set of, circumstances or things that I see or understand or whatever. And so, this is really important right now, because we tend to look at a lot of stuff in the world as horrible. Like people tend to judge it right away. And it's like, oh, this is horrible. This is horrible. And then before you know it, everybody thinks everything is horrible, because that's all we use as an adjective.
Right.
And dramatic, and oh my gosh, did you see this? And so like, first of all, when we get stuck in that emotion, right? If you go back to like that meditation, I honestly, and I know you're pretty similar, like I don't watch the news. I have no interest.
Oh, no, I don't watch the news at all. I
stopped watching the news a long time ago, if like years and years ago.
Right.
And In fact, I have no interest in it if somebody has it on the TV. It's just like, okay, and I'll just walk by and just go do something else. It just has nothing.
Right.
And if something comes to me that was something comes to me in other venues, like, and it hits me a couple of times, usually it's something for me to look at. Well, I haven't really paid much attention to the whole Australia thing because I'm not watching the news. Right. And that was, and this is the whole thing. So I'm sitting here and think about this. So not to you, but to everybody who's listening or watching, the statement, because you and I are very on the same page as this. So what I've been focusing on has been literally, I am the realization of fulfilled potential in this divine embodiment. All I am is this in being realized, and then I commit myself in unconditional self-love to all doings, being aligned and symphonically harmonized as this, right? That's it. That has been my vision, right? High level. So if you think about that and what that means I am committing myself to being all that I can be, like the realization of what I can, the magic of fulfillment, right? And wholeness.
Right.
And so I don't have to define what that looks like, right? If I commit to it, it'll just sort of happen. So like I see the purpose of how that happened in meditation is I just went out there to sit in that and create that and, to be that. And like all of a sudden I see myself walking down a street and I see a dead animal, and I'm walking continuously down this street and I see another dead animal. And then I start seeing more and more. And I was just like, so now right away, people then want to, like, a lot of times you see that. And then it's like, oh my God, why am I seeing these dead animals? This is horrible. Right. It was just like,
right.
It's just sort of like, okay, so why am I seeing this? Like, what am I seeing? And as soon as I asked without judgment, right, I saw that it was Australia, a representation of what's going on in Australia. So I was like, so then I just asked, I didn't assume of what I was supposed to do or anything or judge or whatever. As what is there for me to do? Right. And then it was okay. So then I was guided to, then something just all changed. And it was amazing. And then it encompassed all of Australia. And then my perspective actually pulled out, and then I could see, the permafrost up in the Arctic that's melting. And then I was like encompassing that. And then there was the earthquakes that now I understand, going on in Puerto Rico. And then there's like volcanoes, which I don't know where they were. And I just saw all this stuff. And it wasn't, and I didn't judge any of it. It was just, I could see when I wasn't judging it, I was looking at the bigger picture, and all it was to come together in wholeness. And it was, and I don't want to say balance out, but it was to hold everything in this equilibrium as it exists in multiple dimensions, right? So, but if I would have stopped with, oh, that's horrible, whatever, with the animals and I might not have ever even made it to the first step.
Well, and you if you look at it from a more simplistic perspective, you would have done nothing but project more fear and more withdrawal.
Yes.
I know that at some point, I just, looking at my Facebook feed, and I'm sure at some point I've clicked things that have perpetuated this, but all the poor abused dogs, or the rescue dogs, or the sick dogs. And it's like, I, for the longest time, wanted to just withdraw and go, oh, I just can't even look at that. That's horrible. What's wrong with people? And I've found that now that I've turned that around, and I just send love. So it's to the whole circumstance. So it's more of I don't know, it's more of a healing and a filling versus withdrawing and fear and anger and it's, I feel different now over the whole thing.
Nice.
So I feel that that's the same with what you were saying about by the judging and everything. And
yeah, absolutely. Because you're right. I understand what I know you're talking about, because I see the same thing.
Yeah.
Good morning, Laurel. Laurel just popped up. So, So one of the key things that we were getting, and this is what came from our conversation on Friday, had to do with this non-judgment of guidance, right? Because it's time for us to stop looking at things in fear and start looking at them in wholeness. And instead of asking, or saying how horrible, like, how do I fix this?
Right.
Is instead of trying to take that other step, is stepping back and saying, what is there to do about this? Is there anything for me to do about this?
Right. Right.
And because we are infinite. And so here's the thing. I posted that up on the private group and the Trinity practitioner group. And then, like other people are saying, oh, well, it's interesting because I've been guided to do this in a different way too. And I was guided to do this, or I didn't realize what I was doing, and that all ended up happening too. And it's really cool because it's so very different the way everybody's sort of carrying it out, but it's all coming to the same place. And when we can do that in that place of can we just listen to guidance and not even recognize where we're going with it,
Right.
because we don't need to, because our higher self just knows, we really start tapping into this collective power, right, of that divine consciousness and wholeness. And we change things on a dime. What I love was, it was like the next day, or the next over the couple of days, I guess they started getting rain there now. I'm like, see, look, and how many of us have been getting called to do different things and different, just like randomly, but it's not even just there, because we have stuff going on all over the planet, all
Right.
sorts of dimensions, right? And it's funny because I was just thinking of the whole, so much fire in Australia, then there's so much water up in the Arctic, it's
Right.
it's like, oh, and yeah, and there's just a lot of that rumbling going on. So that's one thing for us to, I think, and as we start creating more out of context, like creating stuff without context, that non-judgment, that acceptance is so important.
Right. Absolutely.
Because you might be guided to do something that just you have no context for, and you're like, and you want to judge it, because then you're like, well, what about this? And what about this? I mean, and it's funny because I had something like that happen this morning, of course, before we got on, and it was sort of like almost laughter out there in the ethers of like, did you have to go there? Like, what were you even like? But I only sort of went there half-heartedly. It wasn't really like a full, getting into judgment. It was like should I be nervous about this? Should I be upset about this? I was like asking my ego, which is really funny. And then I was just like, I'm just going to take care of it. And I did, and it all worked out great. It was like, okay, see, that wasn't even like anything you thought it was. It was easy,
Right.
and it was actually a benefit to me. So that's the whole thing. As we get to these, and I'll tell you what it was, something simple. I want to talk about 3D because people want to know examples, right? So I get this notice this morning, an email from Amazon that tells me that a piece, something that I had ordered in November, had been returned, and my refund was complete. And it's something that my daughter has, and I know she loves it. And I was really confused, like, what? So I forwarded the email to her, and with with question marks, right? And then she texts me and she's like, no, I still have it. In fact, it was a weighted blanket that I got her, right? So she's like, no, in fact, I am laying underneath the weighted blanket right now. And she took a picture and she sent it to me, right? And I'm like, well, it's really weird. So then right away, what does the mind start going? Did somebody hack into my account? Is somebody screwing with my with my Amazon account?
Or did I order two and I don't remember it?
Or right. And you start having this little panic because there's this weird whatever, right? So then I'm like, oh, I've got to take care of this, and I get on with Amazon. And of course I go to Amazon and I don't reply to the email, and I get on with somebody and they're like, well, yeah. And I actually looked at the order, and the order said that the item was refunded. There was nothing else that was ordered that, was not in the scopes of my account or whatever. And then I get on with chat with them, and I'm like, yeah, well, this says I sent this back and I didn't, and And then they're like, oh, well, something there was some glitch in the system. All right, well, yeah, you've already been refunded, so don't worry about it. And I'm like, oh, cool. So I got it for free.
Right. Right.
It was like, hey, look, you got a little present, but that was look at that little situation, right? And I didn't even put it into full gear because I know some people get very hyper about, oh my God, somebody must I'm going to change all my passwords and I'm going to do this because somebody must be playing with my account. And that was even only half mess. And that actually, wasted a half hour of my time.
Right.
Right. But because there was no context. What if I would have just allowed it?
Right.
I feel like, all right, you want to give me money back for something I still have? That's fabulous.
Right.
But there are so many different things that we're getting into that we have no context for. Like we have no idea of why something is happening. What is the purpose of something? Why we're guided to do something? Why we're pushing ourselves in a certain direction? And it's like stepping into a dark room and not knowing what's in there, right?
Right. Exactly.
Before the light gets turned on.
Right. Or only having a flashlight in that dark room and you have no idea what's around you except what you can fit in that tiny little spotlight.
Right. Right. And actually, so that would be a great exercise, right? To walk into a dark room.
Yeah.
And just sit there and not be, some people I know like get nervous about stuff in the middle of the night, if they hear something in their house.
Right. Yeah.
You had that.
I had that this morning, actually. Yeah.
Sort of funny.
Funny. I guess that was the whole purpose behind it.
That was the whole context for you, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And so, yeah, that's a practice for us. It's a habit for us. So part of the thing to practice is to be able to stay in that place of acceptance and unconditional love and centeredness, and to not have all the answers. That's a big one, right? On why for something.
Or you just adopt the attitude of, I don't remember all the answers yet.
Right. And I think that one of the things that, what comes to me right now, this is big. One of the big things is going to be applied in the 3D in the very short term I'm getting is, it's God, I can't even say it. Here you are. Physical, medical stuff for people.
Right.
And this has been going on for a while. And it's really interesting that I just sit back and sort of listen when people talk about that, right? And because right away it's like, I've got to run to the doctor because I don't understand this. And they go to the doctor and they take 500 tests and they don't understand it either.
Right. Right. Yeah. Exactly.
And so, you and I have gone through a lot ourselves where we become far more self-dependent, like independent on, okay, well, I'm asking about this and whatever. And so sometimes I have been guided to do something that is completely non-logical, right? To tend to something that has come up in the physical, like in my body or something. Mm-hmm. It was much more so like, I don't know, 5 to 10 years ago. Now it doesn't happen all that often, but when it does, and now I trust it. But there are so many things that happened to me that I used to talk about the whole hemorrhoid thing back when. I told you about that story. So, and that was all a lesson in listening to guidance over what the internet told me, what Google told me.
Right. Right.
God, that was funny. On the line. Yeah. What Google told me, what I could find online, what I could find anywhere. And then finally I just listened to guidance and it was resolved like that. Never happened again. And it's so like those kind of things. I've had a lot of personal experience because part of my path has included, I don't know, I set it up for myself, obviously, to have to figure it out myself.
Right. Right.
And I think you too, in many cases.
Yep.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, I'm like, look at how much we've gone through with our animals over the years and helping them. And so like, I look at that and I think, well, there's so much going on right now. And so right away, what do people what did people get panicked about, or things that feel wrong or out of sync in their bodies?
Mm-hmm. Which last week, we did bring up how many people we knew that had shingles.
Right.
Right. Yeah, my son texted me a big old rash on his arm. I was
Oh,
like,
interesting.
yeah, yeah,
Right. And right away, what does the mind like connect to? Oh, well, that's, the latent chicken pox, blah, blah, blah. Well, we know, in the physical what that really is. Right.
right.
But it's like, what's funny is even some of the most conscious people I know fall back to, oh my God, I got to go to the doctor and get a new prescription for this because this is not working anymore or change, instead of saying, so what is this showing me?
Right. Laurel says, LOL on physical medical as I ended up in the ER and then the hospital overnight. Although the funny thing is we may get $1,000 insurance check for one night in hospital. Turns out it's vertigo again. Which
Yeah.
I always had vertigo as my warning of when I was stressed.
Oh, that's funny because my mother was having a big thing of vertigo over the weekend, and she was all panicking.
Yeah, when I get vertigo, it's like, okay, what am I unknowingly stressed about?
Well, my mother got, yeah, and so like here's the thing. She has a friend coming from out of town today who's staying with her for 2 nights, right? And in my mother's head is this whole thing about what she's got to do for her friend to stay with her, right? I got past that a long time ago.
Right, right.
But that generation was all about appearances, right?
Right.
So she's like apparently was like doing this really big whatever, like just totally neurotically cleaning her place. And then she tired herself out and she was getting herself all stressed because she didn't think, like, then she started thinking, I can't get it all done in time. It's, like blah, 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 blah. Well, then what happened? She puts herself in AFib, right?
Right, right.
And then she's stressed about the AFib and, oh, I can't sit down and rest because I've still got to do this and da da da. And how am I going to do this? And and then she just worked herself up to this point where she was almost passing out.
Right.
And she's like, I think I have to go to the hospital, blah, blah, blah. And I said, no, sit down, breathe, relax. You know what? Your friend is not going to stop being your friend if your house has a couple of specks of dirt on the table. I'm sorry.
Right. Right.
And you know what? Y'all in the same, you're in the same part of your life. I'm sure she understands. And it's not like my mother's place is always pretty clean to begin with. So I'm just like, what are you doing? I don't understand. Like, what is there to do? But like that's a perfect example too. Like it was like, and then she's like, oh, and that's what we do. I've got to go to the hospital. I've got to go to the doctor. Da, 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 instead of stop and ask, right. What is this? Like, what is this showing me?
Right. Yeah, that's the first place I have worked to where it is now the first place I go to. Okay, what is this showing me? What's this message? This is me telling me something. What am I saying?
Yes. Yeah. What else is, for me, it was the time came out of the blue. I was having the best day. There's no judgment. I was just using because I was like, no, my mother had that same kind of thing happen, but it was stress for her. Right. But yeah, and a lot of times it is the first thing. Yes, the first thing for me is my go-to is, oh, what am I showing myself? Like, what is there that's out of balance? That's
or I'm not wanting to look at.
That I'm not wanting to look at. That I need to, because I've made that message. I've made that agreement with myself a long time ago, right? That I don't need to have my body as a message board anymore, except when I'm totally being totally being thick and ignoring the message over and over and over again.
Right.
And my commitment is I won't do that. So when it does show up in my body, I'm like, oh, so this obviously is pretty uncomfortable because otherwise I wouldn't have put it there, But we still like, so this is all connected. So huge in terms of like guidance without judgment. And that's the same thing because our physical body is guidance. That's what people don't recognize yet.
Exactly. And it's almost like it's the first line of guidance.
Yes.
And only when you it gets louder and louder, it starts coming in from other places because you're not listening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. And so that's like a first step. Boy, this really sort of got off, off track for where we started.
We really have kind of gotten off track. It's still about guidance.
No, it is, but that's really important. I guess it came to me when we were talking, so obviously it was something important to interject because it's funny how we will take guidance in a certain way, but then we forget that our physical body is still guidance, right?
Right.
And our relationships are still guidance, and the interactions we have are still guidance, and it's all interrelated. And I think that's one of the biggest things for us to get through, because I feel like as we're going through these shifts that are coming up, which I feel like we're already, the whole triggers have all started, like we're all in this domino effect of stuff going on, that it's gonna, if we are in fear about our bodies, or what we don't, if we're in fear about what we don't have context for, we will make it worse and uncomfortable for ourselves, because we will make it like with the situation with my mom, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Because then you have something wrong and then you get worried about it. Well, then something else happens and compounds it because you're worried about it.
Right.
And then it looks like something else that's far bigger than what it was originally. And then it just sort of gets bigger and bigger and bigger, right?
Right. And rather than looking at that like, oh, see, I focused on the negative and look what I created.
Right.
It becomes more like, see, I knew it.
Right. Right. And so the key, if we stopped at that first step and just said, so what's going on?
Right. What am I not looking at? What am I not focusing on? What am I ignoring? What am I
right? And what if it was like
misunderstanding?
Right. And in the case with her, with the AFib, it's like your body is telling you, stop. What are you doing? Why are you being crazy? Like, it's all in the head versus like, like that's all in your head. That's all in expectations and what you think other people should think of you or see or whatever. And it's like, breathe. Be happy being you and connecting with the person instead of having to put on a show. Right. And so that feels like it's actually really important. That's probably why that all came up, because I see that all the time. Like I was saying, with people who are really conscious and like one physical thing happens and right away they run to the doctor, they run to the hospital and everything else. And I'm like, and I understand sometimes it's an emergent situation, but then it's like, but did you step back and say, what was this about?
Right. Right.
And
did you even ask for guidance?
Yeah.
Or did you just gotta go?
Right. Yeah. There was somebody I was working with who had been, had a whole series of stuff that happened, had to go into the hospital, almost died, came really close. And then she came out, totally really conscious person, great friend of mine. And so like, I was like, okay, so then we're talking about it and she's like, oh, well, now they have me on this and they have me on this and they have me on this. And I'm like, okay, so have you gotten to the core of what that was about? And then she just stopped and looked at me. And so to me, that's so logical, because that would be the first thing I thought. Why did I almost die and have to throw a blood clot? Like, why did I have to do that? Like, what was the message that I was trying to give myself? Right.
Exactly.
And so, but she'd gotten so caught up in the mind about the medications they were putting her on and being afraid of throwing another clot and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, but did you go back to the core? Why did that happen to begin with?
Right. Why did I need this to be in my reality?
And yes. And did you ask, what is there for me to do about this to change this so that I don't have to live with it for the rest of my life? Right. Because they tell you you're going to have to be on this forever. Right. You're going to have to be on these medications forever. So she did a series of things and then ended up getting off a bunch of the medications, because she realized, oh, wait, I don't have to be, even if they tell me. Right. And then, she went and found some ways of getting through certain things. And then they're like, okay, well, you're doing well. We can take you off these medications. And it's like, see, you know, but that was when she went back and started working at the core of what is this telling me? And so that's what I feel like is happening. And I feel like we get all disjointed.
Right. Well, and it comes back to something we talked about before, is that if you align things and you begin with that, what brings me joy and the self-love, and if you go all the way back there and make sure that everything from that point forward lines up, so many things resolve for you.
Yes. Yes. And I know there are some that will listen to this or watch this and roll their eyes and be like, oh, well, you don't understand because I have this, right? But what we do understand, you and I both have had chronic things come up in our lives that we've both resolved on our own.
Right.
And the resolution had to do with coming to the core of, you know, is one of my, like over the holidays, my daughters asked me one day we're in the car, so what did you do to get rid of your migraines?
Yeah, I used to have migraines too.
And in fact, it was funny because my oldest said, she goes, I remember you coming home from work. She was so many times and just having to go in the bedroom and shut the light off and pull the shades and put a pillow over your head. And that if I wanted to come and talk to you, I had to whisper.
Right.
Like, yeah. Yep. And they were so frequent and so horrible that I was like, I'm too young to have to be on medication the rest of my life. That's ridiculous. I have to do this another way. And that was when I started actually exploring all of self-care and like listening to my body better and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, and I said, yeah, I haven't had a migraine. And I was like, I had to think, I was like, I don't know, at least 12 years or 13 years or something like that. I said, in fact, and before I said, I remember they got less frequent and then they stopped. And then after several years, I had one. And the funniest thing was, and this was even before I had gotten into really this as much consciousness as now.
Right.
But I remember when I got it, I was like having the symptoms before it came on. And I'm like, what's going on? I don't understand. Because it was so out of my reality that I was like, what's going on? And then it was like, oh my God, I can't believe I didn't even know, because for years I had them. And that was like the standard symptoms before they came on. But that was like only one. And I was like, I don't know, it had to have been 12, 13 years ago. And I'm like, so people who like, I had allergies that I changed because I got done with the irritation that I was holding in my body. And a lot of times we have a buildup, like especially right now, you know, there's a lot of people who have an inordinate amount of irritations in their body.
Right. Right.
You know, sensitivities, allergies, and all that kind of stuff. And
intolerances.
Right. And they spend all their time and energy managing their intolerances instead of changing what's underneath it that's fundamental to them, that's causing them.
Right.
Because that's the message, not all the symptoms, but what's underneath it. So, you know, and we can talk about this till we turn blue in the face, but this is a big part of that whole, like, listening to guidance without fear, because right away what happens when we have an issue with our body, like, especially if we see blood, right?
Right.
Oh my God, something matter. Or, you know, we think we're having a stroke or, you know, or something. Heart attack, and that's really common these days too, right? So it's and it's like I said, it's not to never go to the doctor. It's to listen to your message versus getting distracted in the management of the symptom.
Right.
Yeah. So we beat that one to death.
Well, and that's just a version of guidance.
Yeah.
You know, because there are other things like, you know, like I'm guided to focus on this.
Yeah.
Which, you know, so it's the different versions of guidance. Or I'm guided to not participate in something.
Yes. So we had other topics too that we wanted to cover, but we've sort of really gone the full gamut on this. There's also a lot coming up to, what was it we wanted to talk about? vulnerability and authenticity.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that we used to think, like I used to believe when I first, gosh, like 15 years ago, got into the understanding of the energies of the body, and I used to think that my emotions were my biggest weakness. And then I turned that around to understand that actually that they were my biggest strength. And I think that if we get to this place of following our guidance without that, coming from that place of fear, that our vulnerabilities become our strength versus our weakness, because I believe we're so far from remembering our power that we don't understand that the vulnerabilities are actually our strengths.
Well, it's what we believe. Again, it goes back to definitions like we've talked about, right?
Right.
Like, what's your definition of vulnerability, right?
Exactly.
If you think vulnerability is weakness, right?
Right.
Then that's how you're going to hold any kind of authenticity, because authenticity and vulnerability are hand in hand, right? Or what we
Exactly.
consider vulnerability. And I think that, right. So it ties into last week's stuff where we were talking about seeing the discomfort in what we're guided to do as being the message, right?
Right.
And so there's the emotions, right? So then if we're trying to suppress emotions and we're not comfortable with them, then we're not even going to see that message, because we're going to deny that too. You see how many layers that we try to deny our own guidance and knowledge, you know?
Right.
So part of it is to change our definition to what vulnerability is.
Right. Instead of it coming from that place of weakness and fear, it's actually just open for guidance.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
And again, it's sort of like, right. Or if I have the fear, right, which is an emotion, you say, boy, I wonder what that's coming from.
Right.
So, and we were talking about that. One of the situations that I had that was really powerful, like, you know, I've had situations where I've been guided to, you know, I commit myself to the authenticity and to the coming from a place of love and guidance, and keeping all my own judgments and emotions in check on different things, right? But I've had situations where I've been guided to do something that was completely against my ego's want, right? Very
Yeah,
uncomfortable.
I just looked up the definition of vulnerable, and it's capable or susceptible to being wounded or hurt,
Right.
as like by a weapon. So that definition, you know,
creates that lack right there.
yeah, open to moral attack, criticism, temptation,
Right.
open to assault, difficult to defend. Yeah.
Right. And so then we prevent ourselves from that authenticity because we believe that 100% authenticity is vulnerable, right?
Right.
And so like
vulnerable, right?
And so my personal experience is one of the most uncomfortable things I was guided to do, that my guidance had to come in so loud and obnoxious, it was crazy, right? Till I did it. That was against all the emotions of my ego. And I was like, fine, then let me just do this without the ego and just tell me the words, whatever. And I'll tell you, the experience was so liberating because I was forced to be 100% authentic, to do so, and to see my own ego, to put that aside, to come out in authenticity. And when I did that in that particular situation, there was nothing to be, there's nothing for retribution, because here's the thing, when I step into that authenticity, it's actually a strength.
Right.
You know, the vulnerability becomes a strength because it is here it is, here's all of it. And you know what? I'm pretty comfortable and okay with what this is. Like this is what I
need to hide. I have nothing to be ashamed of.
Right. And so if you want to judge it, that's you.
Right.
But I'm pretty okay with this.
Right.
Or not pretty okay. I'm okay with this. And this is what I understand. Now, you can take it or leave it.
Right.
You can judge it, you can whatever. But the funny thing is, I have found over the years, the more I'm guided to do that, nobody ever has anything to say about it, because it's like, what can they say? Because then there's nothing to criticize, there's nothing to judge, because they know it's not going to make any effect, take
Right.
any effect on me. There's
Right.
no power over me, right? So that's what we fear in the vulnerability, right? And what we consider vulnerability.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It definitely gives that power shift. I just felt that. I just got chills.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's it's a really important. Oh yeah. So I do see how it's connected to all this, but
Yeah.
it is a really and so when we say authenticity, I mean truly it's coming to, because it's when we finally can look at ourselves with acceptance and non-judgment, that we can be authentic, because then we're not afraid of anything, right? And I'll tell you what, when I've been pushed to do some things, my ego was freaking terrified. And then I was like, okay, but I trusted my higher guidance so much more to say, okay, I can put you aside. I'll deal with you later, to the ego. Just let me have the perfect words, or like, know exactly what it is that's important, what it is that's to do. Like in the meditation last week, right? What is there for me to do?
Right.
Instead of oh my gosh, let me judge it or translate it or whatever, or be afraid of it. And no, it was just, oh, okay, so what is there for me to do? And if we start doing that, it really connects us in a much higher place, and connects us together in the collective. And that's where we get a lot of really productive work done.
Right.
Shifting. So I would say
That's
that
the doing. That's where the doing comes in.
yes, yes. And doing from that place is a much different place. So I think that our session today is about being able to see our emotions as an egoic message, right? To commit ourselves to listening to guidance free of energy, and to notice that if we have fear or anger or any kind of judgment around a certain set of guidance or whatever, that it is actually the ego wrapping itself around the guidance. And to be able to see that and say, okay, what is there for me to put, what is there for me in that? But then also to separate that out, put it on the shelf, and to follow the guidance in its pure form as we understand it.
Right. Right. And I think all of that is just a refinement of authenticity.
Right. And to find also, and to refine our to look at everything, to commit ourselves to looking at everything in the same way, whether it's our physical bodies, whether it's situations around us, whether we are simply guided to do something out in meditation, or that we're at the store or whatever. And it's not to make ourselves feel better. It's not to make ourselves feel like we're valuable. It's not to make ourselves feel like we're the savior, but simply because we're guided to do it.
Right.
Because that whole thing about needing to be the savior or feel good about ourselves because we're so good and all that kind of stuff, that's all ego. That's the ego
Right.
wrapping around the guidance.
Right.
So whatever it is, so that we can shift that, so we can see that and more easily come together into the wholeness of not just ourselves, but then the collective as well, so that we can be the most productive. Oh, that feels really good.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I say let's go and do that, shall we?
Absolutely.
Wow, there was a lot of egoic resistance in there.
Yeah. Yeah.
I had this immense pressure of my third eye, which usually means there's a lot of like, no, you know. Oh, it eased out in the end, though. And I was being shown, well, look, that's what a lot of these things are. And it was like not only on individual levels, but then on like, community levels and on national levels. And it's like, oh, well, look at like 90% of the things that we put our energy to are just distractions for what the real message is. And it's like, oh, well, let's align that so that it's all, harmonically balanced so that we can just see the message, because that makes it so much more efficient.
Right.
And then once it did that, it was like, oh, then it just felt really nice.
Yeah, it felt really good. A lot of ripple effect.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, and it was funny because when we first went out, I was sort of like, so did we cover what we were supposed to cover? And I got, yeah, this is what this is what was being talked about today. I'm like, okay. Oh, but I can see that being like when I went out, when I did see all of that, how much we are just using energy toward distraction. Of course, we're missing the messages right in front of our face.
Right. Absolutely.
So it was great for us to be able to help clear that pathway out. So that'd be a great thing for everybody to focus on this week. And thanks for joining us. And we'll see you next time. This is Angela Coulter and
Sarah Sieg Evagnoni,
bringing you this week's Ascended World. See you next time.